Hey, welcome. Glad everybody's here. Really good to be with you. Everybody on all of our campuses, hello to you. And, I am thankful that you've decided to be here tonight as we really kick off a brand new discussion. What do you think? And this basic idea is we're going to ask 4 questions. We're going to ask one question every week for the next 4 weeks. Tonight, we're going to dive into a question in a moment, but these 4 questions are really going to help us sort of frame the way that we view reality. It's actually called or described as a worldview. Your worldview is what you believe about reality. You may or may not even know what it is that you believe. You may be even processing what your worldview is kind of at this present stage of your life. But it's basically the way that you view your identity, how you make your decisions about what really matters. Is there truth? These are all some of the really important questions that we're to be asking ourselves in this world. And this may be the perfect time to begin this discussion because maybe in all of U.S. history, we might be in some of the most confusing times in our history, and you get to be a part of it. One of the things that I'm really hopeful for, and actually what I truly believe in my core, is that you're here in this generation at this time for a specific purpose. I think that God has you here for a reason, and I am very hopeful for this generation. I'm very thankful for you. And there are dozens and dozens of coaches and staff alike that truly believe in you, truly believe in Gen Z, which is what they describe you as. You know, there's 2 different kind of belief systems that they say epitomize the American teenager, maybe even the group that came right before you, those millennials. And this is like one way to describe it. It's real worthy. It's a mouthful. It's therapeutic, or moralistic, therapeutic, Deism. You heard that before? Moralistic, therapeutic, Deism. I didn't make it up. Sounds a little crazy. I'll just summarize it like this. It's like God created this sandbox, and he wants everybody to play nice, be kind, kind of get along. And then over the course of your life, 50, 60, 70 years, God's desire is that you just enjoy it. Like that you're all happy and everyone had a good time. And then when life is over, the race is completed, everybody gets a trophy, and he's like, all right, crazy kids, get on into heaven. Kind of sounds nice, feels good, which is why they call it moralistic, therapeutic, Deism. Maybe you kind of subscribe to that or you see how that's believable. There's another one, too, that goes along with that. That's also what they say so many American teenagers believe in. And they kind of came to this conclusion because they asked and polled a bunch of students and asked them these questions, like, what's your religious affiliation? So they said, are you Christian? Are you Muslim? Or are you Hindu? Are you Buddhist? They went through the list. And then at the very bottom, there's a question there's one of those responses that says, none of the above. And if you click that, they now kind of describe you as a nun, like not the Catholic kind, but you're a nun. So if you've clicked that box, you're one of the 26% of American teenagers in the U.S. that have categorized themselves as not affiliated with anything, no plans on that, kind of maybe even atheistic or agnostic, want nothing to do with religion or what religion teaches. I actually believe that to be true, just kind of from my own experience. As I was asking my kids this last week, I said, do you know anybody at your school? My son's in 6th grade, my daughter's in 8th grade. I said, do you know anybody at school that would kind of raise their hand and say, they're not believing, or maybe they call themselves atheists? I said, oh yeah, we know exactly who would say that. We hear kids describe themselves as that. It's kind of like who they are. There's a reputation that comes along with that. I think that's newer. Over the past 10 years, maybe 15 years, there was a time when it wasn't popular to say that. Now it's kind of popular. It's acceptable and it's okay. And so there's probably a lot, and I bet that's the same kind of in your world. You know a lot. Maybe you would even say, yeah, that's me. That's who I am. Well, I want you to know something. It's super important for us to dive into this. And so, like, this series is really conceptualized to engage the mind, to begin getting us thinking. And I know that there's a lot of good thinkers out there. But I want you to know that if we don't begin to really think about our worldview, if we don't begin to think about what is true, I think what ends up happening is you live a life without compass. You live a life without purpose or direction or meaning if you don't actually put any thought to it. I was watching this movie with my son about 2 weeks ago. It's called The Bourne Identity. Anybody seen The Bourne Identity? Get an amen from some guys that have seen A Bourne Identity, okay? If you've not seen this movie, it probably came out when you were -3 or something. I don't know, it was like 2002. And it's one of the greatest action movies of the past 2 decades. It's amazing. Please watch it. But the opening scene in this movie is Matt Damon. You might know who Matt Damon is. He's Jason Bourne in this movie. And the opening scene is that he's floating in this ocean. And he's got like this beacon of light coming from him. And a group of fishermen sees him like floating right next to their vessel. So they pull him into the boat. And they see that he's still alive, he's still breathing. And they notice that in his back, he's got bullet holes. And so they like slice off his wetsuit, and they start carving out the bullets out of his back, and it's awesome. And then he wakes up like moments later, and he starts to dialogue with the fisherman that was carving into his back. And he's asking these questions like, who am I? Because he had no idea, he lost all of his memory through that event. Totally lost consciousness of really who he is. Didn't know his name, didn't know his background, didn't know why he was floating in the water. He had no clue as to who he is. I think there are thousands and thousands of people in this world kind of lost with their identity, and they have no idea who they are. They have no idea why they exist. And they have no connection whatsoever to God if there is one. I believe that there's sort of a crisis of identity that exists today. So this conversation is going to kind of enter some of those tricky waters. 4 questions. Let me just throw at you these 4 questions, and then each week we'll zoom in to them one by one. Tonight, we're going to start out with kind of the first and one of the most important questions, which is this. Why are we here? Who made us? Where do we come from? Okay, not like birds and bees conversation. Where do we come from? Like, you should know that by now. Like your mom's tummy, which is not actually true, but that was always the description I heard. Where do we come from? Number 2, why are we here? Second question, we'll get into this next week. Why are we here? In other words, like, is there purpose for our existence on this planet? Like, do we have meaning, or are we just here? Why are we here? Third week is, how do we know right from wrong? And this is a big one. This is actually a pretty tricky one. How do we know right from wrong? Not necessarily like, how do we know just because something has come from our mom and dad and they've told us, but how do we know that there is a objective moral framework that we live within? How do we know that there is a right and wrong that exists outside of society, or does it? And then the last week will be, where do we go after we die? Where do we go after we die? You know, what's going to be really important as we ask these questions tonight, we're just going to zoom into one. Where do we come from? Like, who made us? What's going to be really important as we ask these questions is that each one of the answers, however you decide to answer it, connects in some way to the next question. Because if it doesn't, what will end up happening is the question and the answer will self-destruct. I'll give you an example. So if your first answer to the question, where do we come from, is, I think that we ultimately evolved and we've come from billions and billions of years and here we are, which is fine. And then the fourth question is, where do we go after we die? And your answer to that is, I think where we go after we die is we reincarnate and we come back as a cricket, and then we come back as maybe like a person, and you come back as something else, and then over and over and over again, you just reincarnate. Well, the problem with that is that the first question and the last question don't necessarily correspond with one another, and so there will be a conflict that is engaged there. There'll be a contradiction. And so in order for life to have meaning, for words to have meaning, for what you think and your values to have meaning, those questions have to correlate with one another. So I'm going to dive in. Let me kind of give you a caveat for everybody on all of our campuses. Let me throw this out for you. If you would say that you are not a Christian, you don't subscribe to the Christian perspective, which is what I'm really going to frame tonight. I'm really only going to zoom in primarily into what Christianity teaches about where we came from. If you don't subscribe to that, I want you to know that you are like super welcome here. And I think this is the exact place where you need to be. I think if you're still sorting out what you believe in, or if you've landed firmly in some belief system outside of Christianity, I'm just grateful that you're here. And this is a place where you can come and you can disagree. And you can disagree with me and still exist here, and you're welcome, and I'm grateful. But this is also a place where we can begin to really explore those deeper concepts with one another, and I hope you do that. I hope tonight you engage. I hope you begin to think in ways that maybe you haven't thought before, because here's what I know is absolutely true in your life as you get a little bit older, as you start to get into the college years and beyond the college years, is there will be an assault on your worldview. There will be an attack on your worldview. Talk to somebody who's gone into college or gone into adulthood, and they will claim that's the truth for them. There's an assault on that. There's an attack on that. And so if you don't know what it is that you believe and why you believe that, and if you've not firmly rooted your life into that, there will be a drift. There will be a drift that takes place. And what saddens me more than about anything else in my life, in my career, is anybody that drifts away from their belief, particularly in Jesus. So let me jump in with the first question: where do we come from? You know, the Bible starts out, first chapter, first statement, like first words right out of it in the book of Genesis. You've heard it, maybe you've read it. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Such a powerful statement that we probably just overlook, or maybe we even toss away as fictitious. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God, which means before time existed, God existed, right? Time is a creation that God put into motion, and prior to that, he alone existed. Which kind of begs the question, maybe you've asked this question before, you've asked this question of your parents, like, okay, you're thinking, before time, God existed. Well, then what was before God? Like, who created God? My son, when he was like 7 or 8 years old, we're standing in the hallway, and like, I think we're getting ready to leave somewhere, and he's like, Dad, who made God? And like kind of how most dads function, you first stall. Like most dads, they stall with something. They're like, what do you mean, son? Like, I know exactly what he means. I know what he's asking. He's like, who made God? So I get down at his eye level. Like, son, you know who made God? You should go ask your mom who made God, okay? Because that's what a good dad will do. Good dad will deflect. I actually don't remember what I said to him. I probably made something up, gave him whatever my reason was that would try to help a 6 or 7-year-old or 8-year-old think about who made God. But what a huge question most of us are really trying to wrestle with. But this is the way that the Bible describes it. Nothing was before God. Nothing was before God. He's the first cause. He's the unmoved mover. He's the only entity that requires nothing outside of himself. Because if God was made, he would cease to be God. If God was created, he would cease to be God. Because God is eternal, which means that there is no beginning and there is no end. He just is. Which, if you think about that long enough, your brain will melt. He just is. When God was describing himself and kind of giving his name to one of the very first patriarchs in the faith, you may have heard of him, Moses. He gave Moses in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, he told him what his name was. Do you remember this? He says, I am that I am. I am who I am. This is what you're to say to the Israelites. Go tell them, I am sent me to you, which I am in English doesn't quite sound as cool as it does in Hebrew. In Hebrew, I am sounds like hayah. Tell me that's not, like God's got this 2x4. He's like, I'm going to tell you what my name is. He's like, brr. He's like, I am, hayah. Like, I'm here. It's a statement more than it even is a name. That's real. Hayah. Say that with me. It's just awesome. Say, hayah. You just said God's name. Yes, he's all-powerful. He's all-knowing. God's all-loving. Hayah. It's like they're saying, like, who is he? He is. No, but what's his name? Yes. It's kind of a rhetorical, like he's just saying he presently exists, and there's nothing that you can do outside of that. He's always been. God does not change, which means that you can neither add to him nor subtract from him. I love how the Psalms write about and describe God. Psalms 90 verse 2 says, before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you were God. I think we can see his fingerprints on the visible world that is around us. Romans 1:20 says this, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Here's a question. Maybe you've pondered this before. Well, then, how do we know that God created us? I mean, how do you know that God created us? We don't. We don't know any more than someone can know that God did not create. We don't know. We operate out of faith. But before we just go to the strict, like blind faith card, let me just give you a few things to think about, a few things to kind of put in your mind with regards to the reason why I think it's reasonable to believe that God is real. Number one, we use logic. Logic is a major aspect to our worldview. Let me describe it like this. There's a kind of an argument that you can pose. It's a logical argument for there to be a first cause. I already kind of mentioned to you before that God is our first cause. Like he started the dominoes, and before him there was nothing else. Okay, you kind of see that, like God began. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. So the universe began to exist. Most scientists, if you were to kind of get into the depths of that, would say that the universe is not eternal, that it began at some point in time. The universe began and was created. So if that's the case, the universe must have a cause. Now, who that cause is or what that cause is very debatable. The Christian believes that God is the first cause. We can also use our eyesight. We can simply look around and see that there's intelligence and it exists. There appears to be order. The world exists. The complexity of human beings is real. You can see that and you can comprehend, and you can ask the question, did we just appear? We can use the science of observation. We can just see that Christianity, this has been an argument for myself for 25 years. I grew up in a home where faith wasn't a part of it. And when I was 15, I came to faith. And what I have learned now for 25 years is that following Jesus just works. Just works. It's not a great argument. It's not going to convince anybody. It just works for me. As I follow him and live my life after him, it just makes sense. We can look to the person of Jesus, and over the next couple weeks, we're going to look more into the person of Jesus and why this matters. Well, here's a couple options. Could we have come from gray matter? Yeah, we could have. Does order come from chaos? There's a Latin phrase so speaks to this ex nihilo nihil fit. Have you heard that? Ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Does intelligence come from non-intelligence? Well, there appears to be intelligence mostly in this world. See, creation and evolution both require faith to a certain degree. You've got to have faith to believe that 4.2, they've kind of zeroed in on this, between 4.2 and 4.6 billion years ago, primordial soup was at just the right temperature that life can come out of that. That requires an amount of faith. You know, there's an atheistic philosopher that thought long enough about this way of thinking, thought long enough about atheistic evolutionary thinking, and this was his bottom line. This is how he says, all right, this is going to describe life. His name's Jean-Paul Sartre. He says, life is an empty bubble on the sea of nothingness. He's like the kind of guy you'd never bring to your birthday parties, you know? He's not a happy dude, but isn't that potentially the reality if you just evolved, if that's the case? You know, what I've learned over the years, what I've kind of learned in doing my own thinking is that oftentimes when I've spent time with other people that don't think like I think, I've really grown in my worldview. I've grown in my thinking. And I don't know if you've been in a lot of conversations with people that don't think like you do. But one question that I've asked probably 50 times in my life has opened the door for conversation to learn about what somebody else believes. It's this question: could you tell me your story? Could you tell me your story? I used this on the basketball court, met a guy, found out that he's recently divorced. He's been through alcoholics, sex, and drug addiction treatment programs multiple times. And because of that, he's kind of landed on this view that there is a higher power. He thinks that there's something that created, but you can never know who it is. Basically, he's like a deist, maybe a universalist. Friend of mine. Another guy that's a Buddhist. Basically, he believes that his whole life's purpose is to empty himself of the need for material things and to kind of allow the metaphysical to connect with him so that when he dies, he can enter into the energy of the universe. Buddhist is essentially atheistic. And then, you know, not long ago, a few years ago, I was walking into the locker room of our gym, and I heard a guy on his cell phone, and he's talking loudly, and he's having this conversation with a guy about this degree program that he's in. Like he's studying Mediterranean New Testament theology. And what's fascinating, he says to the other guy, is that he's the only atheist in his class. So, of course, like, my ears perk up. That's interesting. I want to hear about that. So I kind of like put my bag away and I linger a little bit, like, you know, waiting for him to finish up on his phone call in the locker room, which isn't supposed to happen anyways. But so I'm kind of walking back and forth. And then he doesn't get off the phone, so I go outside the locker room and I'm waiting for him like a creepy little stalker, waiting for him to come out. He finally comes out. I said, hey, I overheard your conversation, couldn't have not. And I work at a church, I'm a pastor, just like threw that out real quick just to get it over with. So I work at a church. I've just never heard anybody that has that perspective before. I'd like to hear your story. So he's like, yeah, let's do it. So I get his number, his name's Dave, put his information in my phone, didn't catch a last name at all, so I put it in as Dave the Atheist. And then, like, a couple days later, Dave and I text back and forth, and we show up at a coffee shop, and I start hearing about Dave's story. Dave was removed from his family, kind of kicked out of his household. He was excommunicated from his Mormon church. And as a result of a lot of things, just kind of landed in this atheistic way of thinking. So I actually don't remember him asking me any questions about what I believed. I don't remember telling him anything at all. And then he's like, hey, do you think I could come to church with you? I was like, yeah, I was going to ask you anyways. Yeah, of course you can come to church with me. So he shows up to church with me that weekend, and we're like sitting in the adult venue seats, and it's a church service on money, which is like the perfect church service for somebody who doesn't believe in Jesus is come and hear about money. It's like, darn it. So we leave. He sends me a text on the way back to his house. He says, that's the first time I've ever sensed that God is real. So then a couple weeks go by, and he continues to come more and more, and he gets baptized, and he starts this journey of faith. And I'll fast forward to about a month ago, and we're sitting down and we're talking. I'm kind of hearing about what's going on presently. And I need you to know that for Dave the atheist, his journey has not been straight to Jesus and faithful the whole time. It's been reverse and back and forth. And listen, my objective is not to try and change someone's mind. It's to get someone's mind open so that grace and truth can enter. That's what we're doing. We're having conversations so that grace and truth can enter into that dialogue so that they can see Jesus in your life, not so that you can try to change someone's mind. And I believe that's what can happen when you have those types of conversations. And Dave's still on the journey, and man, he's a mess. He's a total mess. But I'm not trying to fix people. I'm trying to just push them to the one that can love and draw them close. So here's my takeaway for you. My challenge for you. One is, over the next couple of weeks, you'll need to come back because you'll need to hear each one of these 4 questions. But my challenge for you this week, between now and next Sunday, is to enter into a conversation with someone that believes differently than you do. Enter into that conversation and discover what their story is. You can use that line, you can come up with your own. But to get into a conversation, and then through that, perhaps you'll be able to see what it is that they believe about where we came from. And you'll begin to start putting together their worldview and perhaps strengthening your own. Next week, we're going to dive into essentially why we exist on this planet. Is there purpose for our lives? Don't miss it. Let me pray for you, and I'll send you out. Father, thank you so much for our students. Thanks for your word and your truth, and that we don't just have to blindly live. That we don't have to float around on the sea of nothingness, but that you've already given us a description for how we all started and where we came from, and it comes from a loving, wonderful Father. We love you. We thank you, and it's in Jesus' name that we all say, amen.